All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep, like really deep. We're diving headfirst into Sigmund Freud's psychopathology of everyday life.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Freud, isn't that a little heavy for a Wednesday? But trust me, this book is anything but dry.
Oh, I totally agree. Forget those images of stuffy therapists and couches. This is where things get really interesting.
It's all about those tiny little errors we make every single day. You know, like forgetting someone's name, or misplacing your keys, or even those times you accidentally say something you totally didn't mean to.
Oh, the slips of the tongue, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've all been there. Like that time I called my boss mom during a meeting.
exactly. And what Freud argues is that these blunders, they're not just random. They actually reveal a whole lot about our unconscious minds.
Wait, so he's saying there's a reason behind every time I space out and forget where I put my phone? Like my subconscious is trying to tell me something.
That's pretty much it. Freud believed that our unconscious minds, they're like this hidden world full of thoughts and feelings that we're not even aware of. And sometimes those thoughts and feelings, they kind of sneak out in these weird disguised ways.
So it's like our subconscious is speaking in code and these errors are the messages.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, once you start understanding this code, it can be seriously mind-blowing.
Okay, I am officially intrigued, but I need an example. Like, how does forgetting someone's name, how does that connect to our unconscious?
So Freud believed that when we forget a name, it often has something to do with, well, something we've repressed, like a thought or a feeling that we've pushed down deep inside.
Okay, that makes sense. But couldn't it just be, a bad memory? Sometimes my brain just feels like a sieve.
Of course, sometimes it's just plain old forgetfulness.
Hmm.
But Freud noticed that there are often these hidden connections between the name we forget and whatever's been repressed.
I'm going to need an example to wrap my head around this.
Okay, so Freud actually uses this example from his own life. He was chatting with a friend, and for the life of him, he couldn't remember the name of a famous painter, Signorelli.
Happens to me all the time. It's like I can picture the person's face perfectly, but their name is just gone. Poof.
Right. So Freud, being Freud, he starts digging into this, and he realized that just before this memory lapse, he had been talking about some um, customs of people in Bosnia and Herzegovina where they have a certain, shall we say, acceptance of death.
Okay, I'm not seeing the connection to Signorelli yet.
We'll get this. The words Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Herr, which is German for Mister,
Yeah.
they kind of form this verbal chain that links back to those other painter names that were popping into his head. Botticelli, Boltraffio.
Whoa, hold on. So just a random chain of words can actually block a memory?
It might seem random on the surface, but Freud believed those words were actually linked to some deeper thoughts and anxieties he had about death and illness, which were interfering with his ability to recall Signorelli.
So it's not just the words themselves, but the underlying emotions and anxieties they represent.
Bingo. And to prove his point, he uses another example. This time, it was a patient who just couldn't remember the Latin word aliquis. Sounds pretty simple, right?
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't blanked on a word? Happens to the best of us.
But when Freud had the patient do some free association, things got interesting. The patient's thoughts jumped from, get this, saints to calendars to the blood miracle of St. Januarius.
Okay, now that's a wild train of thought, but I'm guessing Freud saw a pattern there.
Absolutely. You see, the patient was super anxious about a woman's delayed menstrual cycle. And suddenly, all those seemingly random associations, they start to make sense.
Okay, yeah, I can see it. Saints and calendars, they're all about time passing, and the blood miracle, well, that's pretty obvious. But how does eloquus fit in?
Ah, well, Freud, being Freud, he breaks it down even further. Eloquus can be split into a liquus, which evokes ideas of, well, relics, liquidation, even fluid.
Whoa. It's like a subconscious puzzle, and all the pieces fit together to reveal this underlying anxiety.
Exactly. It's like our unconscious is sending us these coded messages, and it's up to us to decipher them.
So what we're learning here is that forgetting a name, it's not just about a bad memory. It often points to deeper, more personal stuff that we might not even be consciously aware of.
Right on. And guess what? It's not just limited to names. This whole concept applies to misreading and miswriting too.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How does misreading, how can that possibly reveal our unconscious thoughts?
Well, one example that Freud uses is this editor who was reviewing a passionate defense of a particular group, and he accidentally misread unselfish as selfish.
So was the editor, like, secretly against this group or something?
No, it's not quite that simple. The misreading suggests that on some level, the editor had some doubts about the true motivations behind the defense. Like maybe he wasn't fully convinced about all this
It's
unselfishness.
like our own biases and beliefs are, like, filtering the information we take in, even without us realizing it.
Exactly. And there's this other example where someone misread poor WM as poor Dr. WM. Turns out they were trying to kind of shift the bad news onto the man's wife, like a way of protecting themselves from the full impact of it.
Wow. It's like their unconscious was trying to create some distance from that unpleasant reality.
You got it. It's fascinating how these little slips can tell us so much about what's really going on inside.
Okay, so we've seen how forgetting names, even like misreading, can be tied to our unconscious thoughts and feelings. But what about other everyday things? What other like blunders did Freud analyze?
Well, he was really interested in what happens when we lose things or misplace them. It's often not just about being disorganized.
Mhm.
It can actually be a sign of some unconscious desire or intention.
So like every time I can't find my phone, it's not because I'm like scatterbrained. There's a deeper psychological reason.
Not necessarily every time. But Freud definitely believed that misplacing objects, it often serves a purpose. Like he talks about this man who kept mislaying his pipe. And get this, it always happened when he was smoking too much. Almost like his unconscious was trying to help him cut back.
Uh-huh. That's kind of funny. Like our unconscious is our personal like life coach saying, "Put that pipe down."
Right. And then there's this other case. This man, he received a book as a gift from his wife, but he kept misplacing it. And it turned out he described his wife as emotionally distant. So the analysis revealed that, like, unconsciously, he wanted more space in the relationship.
So by misplacing the book, he was symbolically creating that distance. Interesting.
Exactly. And sometimes this misplacement, it can be a bit more, well, destructive. Freud talks about this man who accidentally broke a really valuable inkstand. And it just so happened that his sister had just suggested he get a prettier one.
Oh, come on. That's almost too perfect.
Right. It's like his unconscious wanted a new inkstand and decided to make it happen. Maybe hoping his sister would feel bad and buy him one. Who knows?
That's so sneaky. But it seems like all these examples are about like avoiding something unpleasant or trying to get what we want without actually dealing with the issue directly.
You're picking up on it, yeah. Freud thought a lot of these slips and errors, they're like coping mechanisms. We're dealing with stuff in a roundabout way without really confronting it head on.
Wow. This is making me think about all the things I've lost over the years. Like I'm starting to wonder if there was some hidden meaning behind some of those.
Maybe. But let's move on to another category that Freud looked at. He called them erroneously carried out actions. These are like when our physical actions reveal something about our unconscious motives.
Okay, now this is getting interesting. Like what kind of actions?
Well, he talks about this neurologist who kept reaching for his own house key when he was at his patient's doors.
I think we've all been there.
Right. But for him, it was like this unconscious desire to be at home, instead of making those house calls. And then there's this other example, this doctor who grabbed a tuning fork instead of a reflex hammer. And like, it turned out he was feeling really bad about a past misdiagnosis. So it was like his unconscious was reminding him to be more careful.
So our unconscious is like always looking out for us, trying to guide us, protect us, even punish us for past mistakes.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And speaking of punishment, Freud even looked at cases where these actions could be, well, kind of self-destructive. Like he describes a woman who, after dancing in a really provocative way, ended up breaking her leg in a carriage accident.
Ouch. But how is that connected to her unconscious?
Well, it suggests that the accident might have been like a form of self-punishment for her behavior, like her unconscious was imposing consequences.
That is intense. It shows how powerful these unconscious forces can be.
Definitely. And sometimes these forces, they manifest in even more complex ways. Freud talked about what he called combined faulty actions. This is where forgetting and like other errors happen together. It's like a double dose of unconscious influence.
Oh, wow. Like, give me an example of that.
So picture this. Someone forgets about a meeting, but then, to make matters worse, they also get the day completely wrong. And like when you dig deeper, you find out this person had achieved success in a field where that meeting was no longer necessary. So basically, they didn't want to go at all.
Uh-huh. Their unconscious was like working overtime to get them out of that meeting.
Exactly. It's like multiple slips all working together to fulfill this unconscious desire. And now, get ready for this because we're moving into some seriously mind-bending territory. We're going to talk about Freud's take on determinism, chance, And get this, superstition.
Determinism, as in like everything is predetermined, nothing is random. That's a big claim.
It is. But Freud argued that even seemingly random events, they often have unconscious roots. He even used himself as an example. He kept running into chimney sweeps, and at first he took it as a sign of good luck. But then, after some self-analysis, he realized it was actually linked to repressed thoughts about his father's death.
So what you're saying is even when we think, wow, what are the chances? Freud would say there's a reason, even for those random things.
Exactly. And this brings us to a phenomenon that a lot of people find, well, kind of creepy, déjà vu. That feeling of having already experienced something.
Oh, I get déjà vu all the time. It's so weird. What did Freud think about it?
Well, he thought it could be connected to unconscious fantasies or daydreams. It's not that we've actually lived through it before, but that we've imagined it or wanted it on an unconscious level. And then when we encounter a situation that's similar, it triggers that feeling of, wait, I've been here before.
So instead of it being something mystical or like psychic, it's actually our own unconscious minds playing tricks on us.
You got it. Like, he uses this example of this woman who had intense déjà vu when she visited some friends for the first time. She felt like she already knew what the house and gardens would look like, even though she'd never been there.
That is so freaky. It's like she had a premonition or something.
It does seem that way.
Hmm.
But when they analyzed it, it turned out these friends, they were really important in her emotional life, especially connected to a past romance. So the déjà vu, it could be seen as like a manifestation of her unconscious desires and fantasies related to those friends.
So it's like her unconscious had already visited this place in her mind. And then when she got there in real life, it was like, whoa, this is familiar.
Precisely. And it just reinforces Freud's idea that even those really strange experiences, those uncanny moments, they can all be understood as products of our own minds.
Okay, this whole deep dive is seriously blowing my mind. I'm looking at everything differently now. Even like losing my keys or having déjà vu, it suddenly seems like it could have all this hidden meaning.
It is a pretty powerful shift in perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
It opens up this whole new way of understanding ourselves and the world around us.
It really does. But now I'm like thinking, if our unconscious is so powerful and it's always influencing us, do we actually have any free will? Are we just like puppets controlled by these hidden forces?
Ooh, good question. Philosophers and psychologists have been debating that one for ages, and Freud's work definitely throws another log on that fire. But before we go too deep into that existential crisis, let's look at some more fun examples of how our unconscious expresses itself. You ready for more Freudian insights?
Bring it on. I'm totally hooked now. What else did he find?
Well, Freud, he also got really into misreading, like how people misread text in ways that reflect their own desires or conflicts.
Yeah.
He even tells this funny story about himself misreading a magazine title. He saw a wedding celebration in the Odyssey, but read it as a wedding celebration in the Odyssey.
Yeah, I've totally mixed up words that look alike. But like, I'm guessing Freud saw something more to it than just a simple mistake.
Oh, absolutely. You see, at that time, he was feeling kind of bored with his life. And the Odyssey, it's all about adventure and exciting journeys, right? So the misreading, it could be seen as this unconscious wish for something more, well, more thrilling than a wedding celebration in the Odyssey.
Like his unconscious was trying to spice things up a bit. I get it.
Exactly. And it shows how even a little misreading can give us a glimpse into those unspoken desires. Freud also noticed that misreading could be influenced by, like, our relationships and emotional states. He remembered this time when he got a letter with some bad news. It was about a man who was really sick. And he told his wife about it, but she quickly noticed something was off.
What did she notice? Was he like misquoting the letter or something?
It was even more subtle than that. She pointed out that he was referring to the sick man's wife using her husband's name, which was totally unusual. And when they looked closer at the letter, they realized that he had completely misread it. Like he had skipped over the woman's first name and even the doctor before the man's name.
Whoa, like he unconsciously blocked those details out. But why?
Well, it turned out that the news about this sick man, it had really stirred up some anxieties in Freud. You see, he knew another person close to him who was also suffering from a similar illness. So by misreading the letter and shifting the focus away from the man's name, he was unconsciously trying to distance himself from that whole situation.
So his emotions were literally affecting how he was reading the letter. That's like wild.
It is. And it just shows how even in something as basic as reading, our unconscious can have this subtle influence. Freud, He even looked at typos and printer's errors, arguing that those could reveal unconscious stuff, too. He pointed to this hilarious editorial from the New York Times where they were talking about this embarrassing printer's error. A political commentator was supposed to write that this politician was no longer a member of Congress. But, get this, they missed the no in the printed version. So it said he was still a member.
Oops, talk about a Freudian slip on a grand scale.
Right, and the New York Times editor, he was like, maybe the writer secretly wanted to say the opposite.
That's so funny. So even those little typos we make in emails or texts, they could be saying more than we realize.
You never know. It's definitely food for thought. Freud also talked about this misprint he saw in a big publication. The phrase acted in a selfish manner was printed instead of acted in an unselfish manner.
Wow. Seems like even professional editors aren't immune to those Freudian slips.
Nope. And it kind of suggests that maybe somewhere in the writer's or editor's unconscious, they had some doubts about what they were defending.
It makes you wonder, like, how often those unconscious doubts slip into our writing without us even knowing.
Right. It's fascinating. Freud also looked at errors in writing, which he believed followed a lot of the same principles we've been talking about. He talked about this one patient who was trying to explain why he was so nervous, and he wrote, "My trouble is all due to that D frigid wave." But he meant to write cold wave.
Okay, that's quite a slip.
It is. And the interesting thing is, this patient, he had a lot of resentment towards his wife because, well, she was frigid. So the way he mixed up wave and wife, it shows this hidden connection between his marriage problems and his nervousness.
Like his unconscious just slipped out his true feelings in disguise.
Precisely. And it's a great example of how our unconscious can sneak into our writing. Now let's switch gears for a second and talk about forgetting. Not just names, but like impressions or resolutions. Freud noticed that people often forget stuff that's unpleasant or, like, goes against what they unconsciously want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Who wants to remember things that make them feel bad?
Right. But Freud argued that these forgotten impressions, they don't just disappear. They can still have an impact on us, on an unconscious level. He talks about this patient who, during one of their sessions, suddenly remembered this forgotten experience from his childhood. He remembered looking for his mother in a chest. And he had completely blocked this memory out for years.
That's pretty weird to forget what was so important about it.
Well, when they analyzed it, they realized that the memory was actually connected to his nurse, who had disappeared after being caught stealing. And his brother had joked that she was boxed in, which the patient, as a kid, took literally.
Oh, wow. So when his mom disappeared later, he thought the same thing had happened to her, hence the whole chest-searching memory.
Exactly. The memory itself wasn't that traumatic, but it became what Freud called a screen memory. It's like a seemingly unimportant memory that's actually hiding a more complex and emotional event. In this case, the nurse disappearing and the whole thing with his brother.
So these forgotten memories aren't just random gaps. They're actually serving a purpose, like protecting us from those upsetting thoughts.
Right. And this whole idea of repressed memories, it gets even more interesting when you look at Freud's work on childhood experiences.
What did he have to say about childhood memories?
Well, he thought that a lot of those memories, they aren't really accurate reflections of what actually happened. They've been shaped and distorted over time by our later experiences and, of course, our unconscious. He noticed that adults, we tend to remember things through different senses. Some people are more visual, others more auditory, and so on. But childhood memories, even for those who later rely on other senses, they're often super visual, almost like dreams.
Like we've created these little mental stages where our childhood is playing out.
Exactly. And Freud found that those early memories, they often feature ourselves as the main character, even though it's unlikely a child would have that kind of self-awareness so young.
So it's not just about remembering what happened, but about how our unconscious has created a story around those events.
Exactly. And these memories, just like those screen memories, they can act as concealing memories, hiding more complicated or emotionally charged events behind these seemingly simple childhood scenes.
Like our minds are trying to protect us from the full impact of those early experiences by making them seem less intense.
Right on. And these concealing memories, they can be just as revealing as those slips and errors we talked about, giving us a peek into how our unconscious shapes our view of the past.
This is making me think about my own childhood memories now. I'm wondering if there are any hidden meanings or repressed emotions behind those.
It's definitely something to consider, but let's move on to something a little more lighthearted. Slips of the tongue.
Yeah, yes. Those moments when we say the wrong thing and everyone starts laughing.
Exactly. But Freud, he believed those slips, they're more than just mistakes. They can tell us a lot about our hidden thoughts and desires.
So all those times I've called my boss mom or blurted out something totally inappropriate, those are Freudian slips.
He'd definitely say so.
Yeah.
He actually used a fancier term, parapraxis, to emphasize that they have a psychological cause rooted in the unconscious.
So it's not just that we're like tongue-tied or having a brain fart. There's actually a deeper meaning.
According to Freud, yeah. And he even categorized them into different types, each with its own, like, psychological mechanism. For instance, you've got contaminations, where two words or phrases kind of get blended together. And that slip shows us how those unconscious thoughts are colliding.
Can you give me like a real-life example of that?
Sure. He talked about this woman who was trying to describe someone as straight-laced, but she accidentally said straight-at-brazed, combining straight-laced with brazen-laced. Seems like a simple mix-up, right?
Yeah, but I bet there's more to it than that.
Definitely. It actually reveals a deeper judgment about the person she's talking about.
Like she's hinting that beneath that proper exterior, there might be something a little more, wild or scandalous.
You got it. And then there are substitutions where you swap one word for another.
Like calling your teacher mom.
Exactly. Although Freud's examples are usually a bit more complex. He talks about this case where he kept calling a patient by her married daughter's name.
Maybe he was just bad with names.
It wasn't that simple. It turned out he had another patient with the same last name, and the daughter's name just, like, slipped out unconsciously. It suggests that he was thinking about that other patient, maybe some unfinished business or some emotional connection, and it interfered with remembering the current patient's name.
It's like our unconscious can even connect different people in our lives, leading to these revealing slips.
Right, and these slips can also express things we're trying to keep hidden, like repressed desires or wishes. One of his examples is this man who was asked if he was married, and he quickly says no. And then he's like, why should a man like me marry? But then as he's leaving, he turns back and starts telling this story about, I know this nurse who was named as a co-respondent in a divorce case.
Okay.
But where's the slip up?
As he's telling the story, he accidentally says the wife sued the husband for divorce and named her as co-respondent, and he got the divorce. But he obviously meant to say she got the divorce.
Ah, I see it. And considering he just said he didn't want to get married, that slip is pretty telling. Exactly. It reveals a deeper concern about marriage and infidelity, maybe even a subconscious desire for a similar situation himself.
Wow. Freud really thought about everything, didn't he?
He did. And, he also believed that slips of the tongue could be influenced by sound associations, like when words sound alike and they interfere with what we're trying to say.
So sometimes it's not about hidden desires, but just like the tricky nature of language.
In some cases, yeah. But Freud thought even those simple sound-based errors could be, well, exploited by the unconscious. He uses the example of someone who said Apfel, which is German for apple, instead of Af, which means monkey.
Okay. Yeah, I can see how those two could get mixed up.
Yeah, the interesting thing is the speaker's daughter then made a similar mistake, saying Schlesinger instead of Schlesinger.
It's like the slip was contagious.
Right. And Freud suggested that this contagiousness, it might be due to an unconscious desire to imitate or, like, identify with the other person. He also talks about cases where the slip involves distorting a word or phrase, often with a funny or even kind of dirty undertone.
Oh, I've totally had those moments where I accidentally say something a little off color.
We all have. Freud talks about this patient who, at the beginning of her treatment, said, I set up like a pocket knife, when she meant to say shut up. Now, this slip might just be about how she's talking, but when they pointed it out to her, she immediately connected it to a previous slip by Freud himself. He had jokingly said earnest instead of earnest.
So it was like unconscious imitation, but with like a deeper layer.
Exactly. Freud dug a little deeper and found out the patient had a personal reason to focus on the word earnest. It was connected to someone's name. So even slips that seem like simple sound errors, they can have a lot more meaning, often tied to personal stuff and unconscious processes.
It's amazing how much Freud found in these little slips of the tongue. It's like he's showing us that our minds are always working, even when we don't realize it.
That's a great point. And this leads us to another cool thing he observed. Sometimes these slips of the tongue, they become a pattern for someone. Like they do it over and over again. And that suggests there's a deeper unconscious influence going on.
So it's not just a one-time thing. It can actually tell us about their personality or how they behave.
You got it. He gives an example of this young woman who was known for being really bossy at home. And she's talking about her sick husband, and she says he went to the doctor about a healthy diet. But then she adds, the doctor said that diet has nothing to do with his ailments and that he can eat and drink what I want.
That's so funny. Even when she's talking about her husband's health, her controlling side comes out.
Exactly. And these recurring slips, they show how certain unconscious desires or anxieties can really shape how we talk.
It's making me think about my own verbal slip-ups. Like, are there any patterns that might reveal something about me?
Maybe. It's definitely worth paying attention to. Now, how about we look at one more slip, just for fun? This one is a real gem. Freud quotes this woman who says, with a lot of emotion, yes, a woman must be pretty if she is to please the men. A man is much better off. As long as he has 5 straight limbs, he needs no more.
5 straight limbs. That's a weird way to put it.
Right. This slip is a perfect example of what Freud calls condensation. It's when multiple thoughts and desires get squeezed into one, often kind of absurd, statement.
So what's being condensed here? What's she really trying to say?
Well, it seems like she's mixing 2 common ideas. One, that men only care about looks, and 2, that men just need to be healthy and, well, functional to be considered attractive. But the slip also hints at something a little more, well, subversive, like she's wishing for a world where women aren't judged solely on their beauty.
It's like through this slip, she's saying she wants things to be more fair, more equal.
Exactly. And it shows that even those seemingly nonsensical slips can reveal some pretty complex meanings, especially when we consider those unconscious desires.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to pay attention to every word I say now.
As you should. But let's shift gears a little and talk about objects. Freud noticed that how we handle objects, like losing them, misplacing them, even breaking them, can often reveal some unconscious motives.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How can something as simple as losing an object be connected to our unconscious?
Freud didn't think losing things was always about being forgetful or careless. He thought it could be a way of expressing those unconscious desires or anxieties, or even a way of dealing with conflicts we haven't resolved.
Give me an example. Like, how could losing something be so meaningful?
Okay, so he talks about this man who lost a really nice steel pencil. It was a gift from his brother-in-law. And you might think, well, people lose things all the time. But the timing here is important. This happened right after he had a letter from his brother-in-law. And the letter was pretty critical, like accusing him of being lazy and irresponsible.
So by losing the pencil, he was kind of rejecting his brother-in-law's criticism?
You got it. It's like he was saying, I don't need your help or your gifts.
That's such a powerful statement expressed through losing something.
Right. And this whole idea of losing things as a way of rejecting someone. It's also seen this other case where a man lost a knife that was a gift from his wife.
Oh, no. Isn't there a superstition about knives cutting friendships?
Exactly. And this man, even though he said he didn't believe in that superstition, unconsciously he must have believed it on some level. And guess what? The loss happened during a period of marital conflict. So it could be seen as a way of protecting his relationship from the curse of the knife.
So even superstitions we don't consciously believe in, they can still affect us.
Absolutely. It shows how those cultural beliefs, even the ones we think we don't believe, can be really powerful, influencing our actions without us even realizing it.
Wow. This is making me rethink my whole relationship with objects. There's so much more going on than we think.
That's what's so cool about exploring the unconscious, right? It reveals all these hidden connections and meanings we often miss in our everyday lives.
This has been such an amazing journey so far, but we're not done yet, are we? What other cool insights did Freud uncover?
Oh, we're just getting started. There's a whole lot more to explore, from errors in memory to the symbolism of numbers, even the psychology of clumsiness.
All right, let's keep going with this deep dive into the unconscious. What else did Freud find out about these everyday errors?
Well, he also spent some time looking at how our unconscious can mess with our memories. You know, we often make mistakes when we try to remember things, and those errors, just like those slips of the tongue and actions, can be pretty revealing.
So it's not just about forgetting stuff completely. We can also like change things or even make stuff up.
Exactly. Freud called these memory errors paramnesias, and he argued that they often involve, well, forgetting, distorting, or even inventing details, all to serve some unconscious purpose. He even admitted to making a few factual errors in his own book, The Interpretation of Dreams.
Wait, really? Even Freud messed up his memories.
Seems like it. He misattributed a, quote, got Schiller's birthplace wrong, and even created a whole false memory about a scene from a novel.
That's pretty surprising for a guy who was known for being so detail-oriented. What was his excuse?
Well, through his own self-analysis, he realized These errors were all connected to some repressed thoughts and feelings he had about his father, who had passed away. For example, the whole Schiller's birthplace mix-up, it stemmed from a desire to suppress memories of a business associate of his father's who had been involved in this unpleasant incident.
So basically, his unconscious was using these memory errors to express what he was trying to hide. That's wild.
It is. And Freud saw this connection between memory errors and repressed stuff in a lot of his patients, too. People often forget or distort memories that are tied to bad experiences, painful emotions, or unresolved conflicts. It's like our minds are trying to protect us from those difficult memories.
Okay, that makes sense. But if we're always forgetting or changing things, doesn't that mean our memories are unreliable? Like, how can we trust what we remember if it's so easily influenced by our unconscious?
That's a great point, and it brings up some really important questions about the nature of memory and how reliable eyewitness testimony really is, something the legal system is still wrestling with today. But to get back to Freud, he argued that even though these repressed memories might be hidden from our conscious minds, they can still influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
So even though we've buried them, they're still there, lurking in the shadows, potentially affecting our lives without us even knowing.
That's the idea. And it highlights why it's so important to explore these errors. Not just dismiss them as random mistakes, but see them as potential clues to understanding how our minds really work.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But I'm curious, did Freud think there was a pattern to these errors? Is there a way to, like, decode the language of the unconscious?
That's a question Freud thought about a lot. He noticed some general patterns, but he also knew that interpreting these errors was a complex and nuanced thing. Like he found that slips of the tongue, for instance, could involve substitutions, contaminations, or distortions, each revealing something different about the unconscious. Mislaying objects could be about avoidance, rejection, or symbolic expression,
Yeah.
and memory errors could involve forgetting, distorting, or even inventing details, each with its own psychological purpose.
So it's not like a simple translation. It's more like a complicated code that needs careful interpretation.
You got it. And this complexity really shows why it's so important to understand the individual's history, their relationships, and their emotional dynamics to really grasp the meaning behind these seemingly small errors.
Wow. This deep dive has really given me a new perspective on the human mind. It's crazy to think how much is happening beneath the surface, all those hidden meanings and unconscious motivations.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? And it just goes to show how relevant Freud's work still is. Even though it's over 100 years old, his exploration of the unconscious continues to give us valuable insights into why we do the things we do.
I totally agree. But all this talk about the unconscious, it makes me wonder, what about the things we do on purpose? The choices we make consciously? Did Freud have anything to say about that?
Oh, definitely. Freud didn't just focus on errors and slips. He also explored what he called symptomatic actions and chance actions, both of which show how our conscious and unconscious motivations can, like, work together.
Okay, I'm interested. What's the difference between those two types of actions?
So symptomatic actions are those that are clearly connected to some unconscious desire or conflict. They often happen repeatedly and seem purposeful, even though the person might not know why they're doing them.
Can you give me an example so I can, like, picture it?
Sure. Imagine a patient who keeps playing with breadcrumbs during their therapy sessions. They're kneading them into these shapes, like crude little figures. Now, at first glance, it might seem like a meaningless habit, something they do when they're nervous or bored.
Yeah, I can totally see myself doing that if I was feeling anxious.
Right. But Freud, always the detective, he digs a little deeper. And through analysis, it comes out that this patient is struggling with money problems, but he doesn't feel comfortable talking about it directly. So the way he's molding those breadcrumbs, especially how he focuses on the figure's genitals, it symbolizes his anxieties about money and that feeling of being out of control.
Wow, so he's expressing his worries through actions instead of words.
Exactly. And this use of symbolic actions is a common way for the unconscious to communicate those repressed desires or anxieties.
It's like our unconscious is this master of disguise, using these actions to sneak its messages past our conscious mind.
That's a great way to put it. Now, chance actions are a bit different. They seem random and isolated, but when you look closer, they also reveal those unconscious motivations. Freud gives this example of a man who, while chatting with a friend, keeps taking out this matchbox and playing with it.
Okay, I've definitely fiddled with stuff during conversations, but I'm not sure I'd read that much into it. What was so special about this matchbox?
The key detail is that there was only one match left in the box. And when they analyzed it, it turned out this seemingly random action was actually connected to a rivalry he had with a friend from when he was younger. That single match symbolized, like, how exclusive his possession was and how he felt superior to his friend.
So even though they were just hanging out, he was unconsciously trying to prove he was better. That's so subtle.
Right. It just shows how clever and resourceful our unconscious can be in finding ways to express itself. Freud also noticed that these chance actions could be influenced by cultural beliefs and superstitions too. He describes a maid who accidentally took a pie back to the kitchen after serving it and then refused to eat her own piece.
That's so weird. Was she just being absent-minded?
Freud thought there was more to it. It turned out this seemingly careless action was linked to a superstition about donating money. The maid had recently received some money from a charity, but felt guilty about taking it. Her actions with the pie could be seen as a symbolic way of giving back, a way to deal with her guilt.
So even though she wasn't consciously thinking about the donation, her unconscious was guiding her behavior.
Exactly. It just shows how powerful those cultural beliefs can be, even the ones we don't think we believe in. They can influence us without us even knowing it.
This deep dive has been incredible. It's amazing how much is happening beneath the surface of our awareness. It really makes you think.
It really does. Freud's work, even though it's over a century old, still has so much to teach us about the complexities of being human.
I completely agree. But I have to ask, if our unconscious is so powerful and it's always influencing us, do we actually have any free will? Are we just like puppets being controlled by these hidden forces?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Freud's work definitely throws a wrench in the whole free will debate. His exploration of the unconscious challenges the idea that we're completely rational and in control, suggesting that we're not always aware of what's really driving our thoughts and actions.
It's definitely a lot to think about, but it does explain why we sometimes do things that seem out of character or make choices that we end up regretting.
Exactly. And it just shows how important it is to be self-aware, to pay attention to those little whispers from our unconscious so we can make choices that are more in line with who we really are and what we truly want.
So it's not about ignoring the unconscious, but more about understanding it and learning to work with it.
That's the key. The more we understand our unconscious motivations, the more we can take control of our lives and make choices that are true to ourselves.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I feel like I've learned so much about myself and those hidden forces that shape my thoughts and actions.
That's fantastic to hear. And remember, the exploration doesn't stop here. Freud's work is just a starting point. There's a whole world of psychology out there waiting to be discovered, and by paying attention to those everyday errors and slips, we can keep delving deeper into the mysteries of the human mind.
I'm definitely inspired to keep learning. But for today, I think we've covered a lot.
We certainly have. I
Mm.
hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for how powerful and amazing the unconscious mind really is.
It absolutely has. And to everyone listening, pay attention to those little slips and mistakes you make. They might be trying to tell you something. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.